Okay, Dr. RJB here, and um, today I was going to talk a little bit about abnormal labs that you can see in it with exercise. Um, when we work out, the reason that our muscles will grow is because we're basically tearing the muscles down during the exercise, and then we build them back up again. The body has to repair the damage, basically. Um, and what this means is that there's waste products that are produced during exercise. As the tissue is broken down, any um, material that's inside the cell can be spilled. And because of this, there are a few labs that can be abnormal, um, but are really relatively harmless. So, one of the things that you get from breaking down the tissue is protein. And when protein is broken down uh, and utilized, you have to get rid of a nitrogen group on the side of it. So um, that nitrogen group basically uh, goes to a chemical called urea, and so there's a lab that's called the BUN, which is blood urea nitrogen, that we can measure. Um, and there's also a chemical that we use for energy called creatine. This molecule gives up its energy to another molecule, and in the process goes from creatine to creatinine, and we can measure the creatinine. Now, the kidney has to process these two chemicals, and in the normal individual, everything looks great. The kidney just kind of flushes this out into the urine, and everything is great. Um, the problem is when you have somebody who's exercising at the time. The normal individual, they get these chemicals by just moving around. But if you're exercising at a high rate, you're producing a lot of these chemicals, and so they can build up in the system. And it will appear as if you have renal failure because these two chemicals are what we use to kind of measure that. Um, the um, the other thing that sometimes gets messed up are the electrolytes, sodium and potassium. Again, when you break down the tissue, potassium is released into the system, um, and sodium can be lost because of sweating, because there's salt in our sweat. So these things can sometimes be abnormal again because of exercise. Now, just as an example of this, um, I had a patient who was somebody who did weight training a lot. He had huge muscles, and I saw him. Notice his labs were bad. I said, "Oh no, there's something wrong with his kidneys." I sent him to the nephrologist, who is a kidney doctor, and the nephrologist said, "Okay, what do you do?" He told him about his weight training. He said, "Oh, don't worry about that. You're just having labs that are abnormal because of the excess muscle tissue." So after this happened, I had gone to get some labs done, and I had the same thing. I noticed that my BUN and my creatinine were elevated, and it looked like I was in mild renal failure. So, oh, by the way, it's actually called renal insufficiency, not failure. Failure is when it's like dialysis time. So, renal insufficiency is the proper term. Okay, so any event, I knew because of the nephrologist talking about exercise that I had just been running over the weekend, and I was training for a marathon, so I put in quite a number of miles. So I kind of figured my BO and creatinine were related to that. And I kind of figured too it was probably I was a bit dehydrated from not drinking enough fluids. So what I did basically is I waited about a week. And in the meantime, I started drinking 2 to 3 quarts of water per day to kind of flush out the kidneys. When I retook the test, everything went back to normal again. There was a problem with the fact that I was training so hard. Um, the day before my lab, the second time I didn't do any running, and also that I wasn't drinking enough fluids. So I drank extra fluids and that flushed out the kidneys. So basically, this is an abnormal lab, which is not truly a sign of anything bad. It's just a sign of the exercise that I was doing. Um, Again, the sodium can be low because when you sweat, you release sodium. So sometimes you may actually have to take in some electrolytes. Gatorade does that. Um, the reason that Gatorade was developed, there was a doctor, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, who was working with the Florida Gators. And he determined that the sweat from these athletes contained electrolytes, sodium and potassium. And he decided to make a solution that would replace these electrolytes. So by determining the concentration in the average person's sweat, he then went on to make a liquid to replace it. He put some sugar in there for some extra energy, gave it a little bit of flavoring, and basically named it after the Florida Gators. So it was called Gatorade. Now, because the Florida Gators were the only ones who were using it initially, the Florida Gators were winning all kinds of contests. And the people around them were wondering what's going on because the Florida Gators would drink the fluid at halftime, um, replenish their electrolytes, get a little bit of sugar for energy, and they would go out and beat the pants off the other team. Um, well, the other football team started noticing, hey, what's going on here? Why are we losing in the second half of the game? And eventually they found out through the rumor mill that it was this special fluid that they had called Gatorade. And they started drinking it too. And all of a sudden, the Florida Gators weren't winning as much. But the Gatorade actually took them to the national championship that year before people kind of figured out the secret. And so they did a great job that year because of the fluid replacement. And now we have this Gatorade that you can use when you go out running or bike riding or football playing. And also you can use the Gatorade to give a shower to the coach after you win the game. So that's important too. Don't forget that. You got to always make sure that you dump the container of Gatorade on the coach's head so that he can get his celebratory shower. So basically, that's what it's all about with these abnormal labs. Hope you check out some of my other videos. Okay, take care.